Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Coffee and Open Source, a place to meet some new friends, have some great conversations, and maybe learn something on the way. I'm your host, Isaac Levin. If you're enjoying the conversations here, be sure to like, subscribe, follow, or if you're watching or listening. Also, if you or someone you know would like to come on the show and have a chat with me, feel free to reach out to me on whatever social media platform you're on, because I'm probably there too. And the best way to find out where my handle is, it's if you go to isaac.r11.com, you'll find it, and you can go ahead and reach out to me. All right, so with that out of the way, I'm looking forward to chatting with my guest. It's somebody that I always see on the conference circuit, and I'm looking forward to learn a little bit more about him and just chat. So my guest today is Steve Smith. Steve, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, thanks for having me here. My name's Steve Smith. You'll find me online as Ardalis because Steve Smith is an incredibly common name. And yeah, been doing software and business stuff for quite a while now and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I always happen to see you at conferences and we chat, like have small chats, but I don't think I've had like a long form conversation with you before. So I'm looking forward to that. And how I like to start these conversations is, figuring out how it got started. Like, when did you realize that technology was the thing for you?
I don't know. I had the good fortune of having computers in my home even when I was very young. So I remember like my dad and I would spend a lot of time on Apple II Plus back in like the early '80s, I think is when that came out. So I was born in '73, so I was like, 7 or something. I'm, figuring out stuff on the computer and playing little games. And as the years went by, we always had a computer in the house, and it was a thing that I used for school, but also to play on and to program. And I think probably the Apple II was the thing that started me the most because at that time the way that we would make games was we had a subscription to some magazine, had to type in the
Yeah.
code, right? It didn't come with a CD or anything, and so you had to like debug your code if you made a typo or anything and figure it out just to get the game to work that you wanted to play. And so it was a little bit more of a barrier to entry than just grabbing it off of Steam. And that kind of stuck with me of, hey, I can make this thing do whatever I want. And that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole thing about the CDs in the mail thing. So I'm a little bit younger than that. So the CDs by the mail thing has always been super fascinating to me because um just like I'd imagine that the effort, like is some for instance, like if there was a typo, right?
Right.
Like how do you troubleshoot that? Right?
Yeah.
And because I remember I used to get like Code Magazine in the mail when I was like earlier in my career. And like you would take a look at some of the code and then you'd see typos all the time.
Yeah.
And, it was just one of those things, and I'd imagine it as you're getting started, like, you don't know how to properly debug code, right? But you had to figure it
Not at
out.
all. Right. And mostly like the debugging was like I don't recall there ever being an actual typo in these code listings in these magazines. But I do recall me making typos. And so the debugging step was like going back very carefully and comparing like what did it say here? What did I put there? And it was Apple Basic, which has line numbers. So it was like line 10, line 20, or line 30 was the start of every line of the programming code. And so you use that to like check each line and see like, did I type out what it wanted me to type out? And so that was as much debugging as I was doing at that young age. But that was part of it. That was figuring out why it didn't work and making it work. So
Yes, I mean, so, one of the things that I always find fascinating too, it's like for people especially that had like computers at home, right? Like how was gaming, like, a big part of it too? Because you talk to a lot of people in tech and, like, their first entry is like, "Oh, I liked playing games," like, on the Apple II or on whatever, text-based games or even if they had, like, some GUI-based games based on how old you were, and that's kinda
yeah,
like their first introduction into technology, and, like, a lot of people, like, they want to go down the path like, "Oh, I wanna build games," and they realize as they go through the machinations of, like, computer science and whatever, that making games isn't as easy as it probably seems. Like, was that kind of similar approach to you where it's like you really like the idea of
and I'm
games?
I
Yeah.
I'm sure I recall like as a small kid that like the idea of like playtesting games as being the best job ever was something I thought, but like then you get older and you realize like, well, no, because that would not be fun at all, and it would just take all the fun out of playing the games because
Yeah.
they're not just going to say go play games and that's it. Like they're going to want you to like test specific things and go see if the clipping on this corner works with every
Yeah.
different piece in your
Yeah.
inventory. Like that's boring as heck, but like
Yeah.
that's what play testing the game would be. So no, I didn't act on that. And some of the games I remember from Apple II Plus, some of them were text based. Like some of the ones that my dad and I would play were like fantasy text based, go in, kill the monster, take the treasure type of thing. There's a whole series of games called Emon, like EAMON, that I remember that were like that, and those were interesting. We did write a program. I think my dad mostly, or maybe he got it from a magazine, but it was a you know I think it was called Animal, and it was a text-based game that you would play where you would try and guess what something was by playing basically 20 questions. Is it
Mhm.
is it bigger than a bread box or whatever? And every question led you down a different path. So everything was like a yes no. So it was like a binary tree. And then there wasn't anything saved to disk. There was no database. It was just in memory every time you ran the program. But as you ran it, it would generate this knowledge tree, right? So you could say something like, is it a mammal? And say yes. And say, is it a dog? And say, well, yes. Okay, so it's a dog. Okay, now
Yeah.
play again. And then the next time, like you got to narrow it some other way if you want to get the cat, right? And so yes, it's still a mammal. Is it a dog? No. Okay, well, give me a new question. I can say whether it's a cat. So that kind of stuff, like really simple, but still like teaching you how to program and logic
Yeah.
and all that. And another one that was fun, I remember, was called Space War. That was like an X-wing looking thing and a TIE fighter looking thing and a planet in the middle with gravity, and you'd use your joystick or whatever, and it was a two-player at the same time game, which was like the first of those on the PC, or well, the Apple II at this point. That Well, maybe that was the PC. That might have been PC. Maybe that wasn't on the Apple II. I think I'm remembering that one on the PC actually. So, but that one was fun as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny how, like you pointed out, like the boring parts of building a game at least stood out to you. Like, you know, I think a lot of people, they have to actually think about it a little bit more. Like, oh, okay, testing games. I don't know if you ever watched the show Mythic Quest. It's a
Mm.
show. I can't think it's on Apple, but it's like the whole show is like based in like a video game studio, and like just it's basically like any office sort of
Right.
base comedy, but it's in a yeah, and just like all the tropes that you would think of like people that build video games exist in it, and it's pretty funny. Like the testers are, as you would expect, they just sit on couches and play video games all day, and like they're kind of like, I don't know, quote unquote, like they're not thought of as like like real employees. They're just kind of like treated as like the tester, like the robot testers. Um,
Right.
but anyway, so with that, like, when did you find out that like computers or technology was something that you wanted to like build a career out of, or like actually like be in technology as a job?
Well, the military kind of helped me out here in a way
Yeah.
because in high school I really liked physics,
Mm.
and I had a really great teacher, and I thought physics was super cool, and I wanted to learn more about it. And so that was my main plan going to college, was like I want to go major in physics and get a degree in physics, and I got an Air Force ROTC scholarship to go to University of Chicago, and I thought this is great. But they didn't want me to learn physics. They wanted me to do comp sci or math.
Mm.
And so I was like, okay, fine. I'll dual major in physics and comp sci, and that'll work. And then for various stupid reasons, that scholarship ended up falling through because I'd had knee surgery from a soccer injury in high school, and they didn't let me know that that was disqualifying until after I'd already gone to University of Chicago, and so I ended up having to leave because I couldn't pay tuition because they
Sure.
didn't give me the scholarship after all. And so I went to Ohio State University, which in Ohio it was in-state tuition. It was much cheaper, and just kind of followed the same plan of I'll do physics and computer science. And then I get to like my second year, and instead of doing the 100 level things, it's all the 200 level physics classes. And we'd get like two homework problems, and it would take like 4 hours to
Sure.
do.
Sure.
And it wasn't quite as easy and fun as like the basic physics was. Meanwhile, I'm doing the comp sci stuff, and it's all the programming stuff was fun and easy, and you could go to the computer lab and hang out with your buddies and kind of look at each other, how you implemented things and whatever, and that was encouraged. And so like I just kind of gravitated toward that because it was uh much easier for me and more fun. And also, I was starting to look at like, what are my job prospects going to be? What can I do with a bachelor's degree in physics versus like it's the mid '90s and this dot-com boom hasn't really started yet, but it's coming. And like you can see, there's this huge demand for software development starting. And so I just decided to like fully just major in comp sci engineering, and that's what I ended up getting my degree in.
Yeah, I find it funny you said it's like, what are you gonna do with a bachelor in physics? And I feel like this with a lot of the, I guess, the practical sciences. Like, what are you gonna do with a bachelor in chemistry? You're gonna get a master's and then a doctorate in chemistry.
Right. Yeah. So
Like,
you either
so
keep going to school or
yeah,
or you.
because I had a similar thing with chemistry. Like I really enjoyed like the first two or three classes in college of chemistry, which is like basic chemistry. And then I got into
Right.
like organic chemistry and let's just say my brain didn't function in that way. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I had no interest in like being a chemist, but I enjoyed doing the like I had that as a like the science requirement. I enjoyed that. So I had to like find a new science requirement. Because so like
Right.
I went over to geology, which I liked as well. But yeah, I mean, the thing about, like, the computer lab thing, like, I was having a conversation with somebody, this is probably a few years ago now, it was like, that's like the your first introduction into, like, tech community is,
Mhm.
like, you're in a computer lab and, like, you're all working the same thing and you're all stressed and, like, yeah, the computer lab at the school I went to had, like, a ping pong table, so people were playing ping pong all the time, and I feel like it's, like, the first little taste of, like, community. Like, did you feel a very similar way where it's, like, you're kind of all in the we're all in the boat together trying to, like, do the same
Yeah.
thing? Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't like sometimes you had group projects, but even when you didn't have a group project, you all had the same homework, you all had the same
Yeah.
thing you were trying to do. And you were a lot of times, some deadline coming up, and so everybody's in the lab at whatever time. And the stuff that we were working on in Ohio State for at the time for my major, like everything was on HP Unix workstations. And so it wasn't like you could just go home and do it on your PC if you had one. Like you had to be in the lab to do the work. And so yeah, you had this community there. I was fortunate. I also got an on-campus job um, as basically a computer lab monitor, and so I always had a spot that I could work when I was scheduled to work. I could work on my homework while I was getting paid, and basically your job was to like make sure the printers had paper and
Yeah.
toner, and
Yeah.
then answer people's questions if they got stuck on things. Um, and so that kind of also put me in this. Uh, I don't know, down this path of like I can go and answer people's questions and help them, and that was enjoyable too. So that became something I would do a lot of.
Yeah, there's I feel like there's a lot of similarities between you and I, like, the 'cause I had a help desk sort of job too, where it's like people would come in and it's like, can you check how many? Because one of the things in my university is everybody got like a fixed amount of like pages they could print every quarter.
Okay.
So people like, oh,
Yeah.
can you check to see how many pages I can print? Like stuff like that, or like I can't get access to this one system. Like, can you help me reset my password or whatever? So like that sort of stuff. And I tell you what, like having access to like a computer that I could do work on, like while I'm actually getting paid was, like, the greatest thing ever. Like,
Yeah.
I would always be picking up shifts, like, I always pick, like, the shifts that nobody wanted, I'm like, "I'll take those." 'Cause, I mean, let's be real,
Yeah.
if I'm, like, at my house, like, trying to do homework, like, I grew up with the privilege of having, like, a PC and like, that I could take it home in college, like, at home in college, and so I very much was like, if I go home, I'm not gonna do homework. I'd rather much stay at on campus and do homework.
Right.
Here's a fun question. Do you remember, like, the first programming assignment you had? Like, in your computer science classes? It was like
Computer science.
there was not trivial, like, not hello
Um,
world, but, like, where you actually had to build something?
I remember I had to build like you had a project that you had to build at my one class I took in programming at University of Chicago, and that stands out to me because it was Scheme, the
Oh,
language which I've
yeah.
never used since, but it was really interesting to learn. And the thing I chose to do was build basically a text-based game that was Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh,
So
yeah.
you were like navigating through the Monty Python and the Holy Grail universe or whatever, and encountering the Black Knight and the French folks in the castle and whatever, but all written in Scheme, and so that was an interesting challenge at the time. So that one stands out to me. I did have computer courses like in high school too, so like even before college, but I don't remember necessarily what the uh, assignments were. I think I know one of them was like translating weather from Fahrenheit to Celsius and adding wind
Yeah,
chill and things
sure.
like that, and like Pascal. So simple things like that.
Yeah, so I took a scheme class in college, and I'll remember it to this day because my professor comes in, like he gives us an assignment. And scheme, like for folks that don't know, like it's based of like the ideas like recursion. Like you have it's like built into the language, which is kind of crazy to think about. And um, I remember, we had this assignment, everybody handed in, and the professor comes in like the day after and he's like, "Well, I want to congratulate a few of you." And he calls out the names. And he's very much like, "So your program crashed my PC." And like it wasn't like a judging thing, but it was just a very funny thing. And he had in this obviously I assume this happened a lot. So he kind of the next class he spent the whole thing about like why recursive based languages or recursion in general is very very dangerous, right? But I just thought like I'll always remember that he came in and he was like, "Hey, you crashed my PC. I'm trying to grade stuff and crash it." Well, but it's yeah, I don't know if there's any, like, real, applications of Steam, like, in the real I assume there is, but I had, like, 2 or 3 classes in college that used it, so maybe it's, like, the certain professors kinda gravitated towards it just to teach, like, programming concepts to folks.
Yeah, like definitely that was true. Scheme and Lisp, which is a variant of,
Yeah,
were definitely popular for teaching like just a different way to think about programming too. Because like you said, it's like recursion first, which is
yeah.
not at all how like a lot of other languages and like any of the object-oriented languages
Oh,
how
sure.
those operate.
Yeah, it's like a functional language, right? So, like, similar to Lisp or, like, modern functional programming languages now. Yeah, it especially if you go from that and I think that, like, the next class that I took was, like, C. And it was
Right.
like very, very typical, like build an ATM in C, build like a text-based game in C. And
Right.
and I remember thinking it's like, because like the shift from like a functional language to an object-oriented language is so like large, right? You have to
Yeah.
think about so many other things. And I struggled at first really, really hard with object-oriented languages, just because you have to do things like care about memory and care about
Yeah.
this and um so when so for you, obviously, when you took that scheme class, um, as you were going through sort of university and doing all these things, like when did you realize that like like this is the career for me? Like this is where I'm gonna make my money. This is the thing.
That second year at
Yeah,
Ohio State, when I
yeah,
decided to switch from physics to just doing computer science engineering,
yeah.
I think was probably around there. Um, I like because of the fact that I had to leave Chicago and had a bunch of debt, even though I was only
Sure.
there for like the one quarter. I was spending all my time trying to figure out how I was going to pay for college and rent and anything else. I didn't have any help from my parents, so I was also like working shifts, loading trucks at night, and taking on the computer job that I talked about, the computer lab, and I also joined the Ohio Army National Guard because my scholarship I had gotten was for Air Force ROTC. But the one of the people I met when I was doing the loading the trucks thing was in the National Guard and was talking that up. So I decided I'll do that, and so I joined Army National Guard and then joined ROTC without a scholarship at Ohio State. But even when you're not a scholarship, you get a little bit of a stipend. So that was again helping. Um, and I was interested in the military for a variety of reasons, but it was, in Ohio, at least at that time, like you didn't get called up to go anywhere for foreign wars for the most part, unless World War III started, was what we thought. But you would get called up if there was flooding or a blizzard or
Mm,
things like that. And so it was, most of the missions that you were getting called up for, as I understood it at the time in the 90s, were, helping your neighbors more than going off somewhere. So,
yeah.
so that appealed to me along with, the discipline and staying fit and things like that. So, that was another part of my college was doing all the leadership things and the art aspects. Um, and that also kind of like led into where I wanted to work and things like that. So
Yeah, I mean,
hopefully that answered your question.
yeah, no, it did. It did. I think one of the things that I always find fascinating about people who get started in tech because I think that there's a very specific mindset of somebody, especially if they go through like a computer science curriculum where you're given just all of this information, like how algorithms work, how data structures work, how networking works, and then you actually had to get a job. And you realize very,
Yeah.
very quickly that like the work that you're being given in your first entry level job doesn't always 100% align with like the stuff that you were taught in school, right? Because
Right.
for the most part, like most of the
For
jobs that
everybody. Yeah.
yeah, most of the jobs that we're doing in tech is like basic fancy like forms over data, or I have some data and I need to get it to like visible in some UI of some sort. Um
Right.
so like your first job, like, did you have a very similar experience where it's like your first job was very much just like, "Oh, I guess I'm doing this," right? And
Yeah,
you had to
it was
kind of learn like a whole
definitely
new thing.
different. Like I had some internships in college toward the end, like beyond the, monitoring computer lab thing, like actually had a company doing work with them. Um and so that helped a little bit, but like when I graduated and had my first job, um the consulting company that I went to work for, well, let me back up. I had options. I had a few different offers in the late '90s, and I ended up choosing to work at a consulting company specifically because I wanted to maximize how many different organizations I got experience with and see how different teams built different kinds of software differently. And that was a very intentional choice, and I think it paid pretty big dividends in my career overall because instead of going to like a company and then working there for however long and on one team on one product, I was typically at a client engagement for 6 to 12 months and then on a different one and a different one. And I spent 5 years at that first there and saw a whole lot of different ways of working. But definitely, like after I graduated, the consulting company gave us like I think it was 2 weeks, maybe it was 1 week, like a boot camp. And at that time, they were teaching visual interdev and how to do stuff with ASP, which was this brand new active server
Mm,
pages technology from Microsoft, which of course they didn't cover in college because it was far too new for that. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I thought the tooling was way better than the Emacs editor that I was
sure.
using for
Yeah.
everything in Unix at school. And in my very first client engagement, I was super lucky that that whole team that I was working with was focused on the Y2K bug because
Oh, wow.
it's 1997 to 98, and they see the writing on the wall that the Y2K thing is coming, and so they had all been tasked with like just go check and double check and write tests and retool, make sure that this huge household name business does not suddenly cease to exist on 2000 January 1st. Uh, and so they were busy doing that, but they still needed stuff built. So they had brought me in to build this thing, and they let me pick the technology. So I spent like a couple weeks evaluating different options and settled on active services as the best thing at the time. And you know, then my boss there at the client was really helpful at teaching me some things about that I hadn't picked up, like how to, like you were saying, like you've got all these disparate things you learned in this class and that class,
Yeah.
but seeing how they all fit together to build a business application I had never done before. And so he was a really good mentor in teaching me stuff about like how to structure databases properly and how to communicate with them effectively from the application. And you know I had learned SQL in college a little bit, but like how to really use it to
Yeah.
for the application, and that was very helpful.
Yeah, it is kind of funny how we we kind of take all of these concepts and then we just have to figure out how to use them as we go about our business. Like and then like some concepts like I've never really had to think about like big O notation ever. But it's
Right.
like it was like one of the first things that I was taught in computer science, and I'm like, oh, okay, this is must be very, very important, like as a part of a career. And then, I've done consulting, I've done like line of business apps, I've done so all these things. And I've never once really had to think of like, okay, like how do I calculate the big O notation of this particular thing, right?
Right.
And yes, there's probably lots of people out there that that's their job. They're optimizing algorithms to be as effective as possible, but for the most of us, not so much. Um,
It's very true. Like,
yeah,
if you had an interview question and it's like, oh, how would you sort this list, or how would you,
yeah,
search this list, and do you use bubble sort or merge sort or whatever? It's like, I hit dot
dot
sort,
sort,
and
yeah.
the framework does its thing and it's good enough. And like, I'm not the framework author. I stand on those giants and build stuff that people actually use. And so yeah, or Google exists and I hit Google and it tells me,
Oh,
and
sure,
the
yeah,
yeah. But like either way, I don't necessarily need to be the one to reinvent this particular wheel, for this interview question.
yeah,
So
yeah, and especially like I don't see it as much anymore like in tech hiring, but it's like a lot of questions are like kind of memorization style questions too.
Right.
I see substantially more. It's like, tell us how you go about solving this problem, which I think is
Sure.
substantially more interesting because it
Right.
kind of, especially now where it's like we have so many tool options and programming language options, and there's AI now and all these things. You know, to your point, like if I could easily just find the answer to this like with a search, like
Mhm.
what's the difference between, hiring like a junior person who can just do searches versus a more senior person that actually understands how architecture works, understands how to put together systems, all that sort of stuff.
Right. Yeah, there are two kinds of knowledge. There's things you know and things you know how to find.
Yeah.
And so you don't necessarily need to fill your brain with, rote memorization of all these things that, as long as you know how to find it, then that saves up room for other stuff, right? And so like you just store the pointer and not the thing. But the other thing is that you can only search for stuff that you know exists.
Yeah.
Like, so like you don't know what you don't know. And so like part of when you're hiring people, the difference between that senior and that junior is that the senior person has a much broader set of things that they've encountered, and is more generally more open to the idea that there are things that they haven't encountered.
Yes.
Uh, and so they can search for more different things and also like search in different ways that might help them find the answer, whereas a junior is going to look for the one way that they saw it done once, or they're going to search for something that's totally vague and won't work.
Yeah.
Now, this is probably getting better with AI, obviously, but like in the days of Google search for the first 25 years or so of Google's existence, you kind of had to know like the exact keywords to
Yeah.
use to get the right answer, and it was a skill to know how to use Google effectively, which the Chat GPTs are probably making less and less necessary every day now.
Yeah. One thing I think of too, and I mention this when I talk to people that are newer in career, it's like I can tell like the experience of an individual by how quick they quote unquote give up. And when maybe I give up is realize they can't solve the problem themselves and they need to go outside of what they currently know. Because if you have like somebody that's fairly new in career, they try to solve it themselves because they don't want that feeling of like they don't want to feel like, oh, I don't know how to do this. They want to compete with other people. And a senior
Right.
person, if they get to a point where like I'm gonna spin cycles on this and it's not worth it for me anymore, they'll find somebody to help them or they'll find another solution somewhere else. Like they what's the best way to phrase this? They more quickly decide to not give up, but like route things to other people.
Yeah.
And I say this to people that are new, and they give me this look of like I'm allowed to like ask for help. I'm allowed to do this because it's like, yeah, of
Right.
course you're allowed to ask for help, but I guess there's a stigma where it's like you have to solve the problem yourself in this world.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a confidence thing, right? Like when you're new, like let's just say you're a junior person at a brand new team, and you just got hired, and you've got this huge imposter syndrome, and you're like, I just beat all these other people, and they hired me, and I don't know how they chose me because they could have had this other person, but was super smart, but they picked me instead, and man, I better impress them, or else I'm going to let them down, and they're all going to see what a fraud I am.
Sure.
And so they can't go in and they in their minds they're thinking, right, I can't go and ask all these questions and show them that I know these things. Like I got to impress them. And so that I think is what leads to like this junior mindset of I got to do it myself, I got to show how smart I am, I got to prove myself, versus it's okay to ask questions when you get stuck. uh, and the nice thing about living in an age with the internet, even pre AI stuff, is like you don't have to necessarily ask your coworker. Like most problems you run into, you could ask anonymously online and find the answer, or have someone give you the answer, in parallel to what you're doing, right? So like I wrote an article on this a long time ago, but like when you're troubleshooting, my kind of checklist guide for new developers is like time box how long you're going to spend on the thing, and it's usually no more than like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And at the 15-minute mark, if you still haven't figured out what the issue is, then start expanding the way in which you're attacking the problem to not just be you. And that means like go search the internet in a different way, or go post on Stack Overflow, or drop a note in your Slack or Discord or forum or whatever. Like just go find the different ways that you could go have uh, other people work for you, to give you that information, and then you can keep troubleshooting, right? It's not to say you're giving up. You could still keep banging your head against the wall if that's the most important thing you have to get done. But now, in parallel to you doing work, the rest of the world, or some tiny fraction of it, is potentially doing some of that work for you as well.
Yeah. And I mean that transitions to this next thing I want to talk about. It's like you know, we were talking about this a little before we got started. It's like, the deciding to kind of transition that work to somebody else. It's like now, even the last couple of weeks, it's like the idea of like writing software like one keystroke at a time is like people's like, why would you do that? Because now you can have agents spin up and you can have a huge like you can have a squad of agents and you can have five agents and each agent has a particular role and agent is doing this and this agent is reviewing that work. It's like the question that I have is
Right.
like and this goes back to the tool conversation. Like we have so many tools as developers. So like if you're getting started or you're trying to like learn a new tool, like for you, Steve, like how do you start? Like how do you go through the process of like kicking tires on things or, figuring out if it's something a tool that you want to add to your tool belt or your workflow?
It depends on what kind of tool it is, I think. Like if we're talking about like a new library or something for programming, I'll probably go like look at the GitHub and glance at the code and look for some docs and see if there's a YouTube video about it or something like that. Almost certainly, very quickly, I'll try and write some code myself to see what it feels like to interact with it. Uh, I could see today like asking ChatGPT to tell me more about it and maybe compare it to some competitors or compare it to something I already know and have it spit something out that might be a good overview. If it's a more graphical or visual tool, like some new piece of software I haven't used before, like let's say some video editing software, then I'm going to spend more time on YouTube where I want to see how to actually interact with the tool, and um, that would be my first place to look would be YouTube tutorials and videos and tips and whatnot, so that I can see what it's doing and have it on one screen it's doing it and I'm trying to do the same thing on mine and just it oftentimes what you see on an internet video is not what is in the current version of the thing you're
Sure.
trying to use,
Sure.
and so that making sure it actually is what it says it is a big part of that for me at least.
Yeah, I remember when I was, first getting started in tech, like I used to take advantage of Pluralsight all the time. And I always used
Mhm.
to, I would go to Pluralsight and I'd open, ASP.NET, blah, 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 right? And I'd watch it and I noticed that like it's not up to date. And then I would just search for other videos and then I would see like the new version, right? Because like a lot of these authors, like they would just like have a new version every year because the framework changes. And it was one of
Right.
those things where I felt like I would always have to be like latest. Like I would search for some content and then I would like sort the courses by latest. And that was how I
Right.
kind of figured things out. Because to your point, like especially with video content, unless you understand when things come out, you don't really know what is latest and what is not latest.
Right. Yeah.
Um, so for, on the flip side of that, like instead of learning like new languages, like learning how to like you insta like you use ChatGPT to like compare things. Like how much delving have you done like into this agentic workflow? Like where it's like, oh, you have like a pretty sophisticated prompt and then it goes off and it does a bunch of stuff and then your responsibility as the engineer is to like review these things. Like have you started to play around with that a little bit or is it something that you haven't quite found like a use case for it yet?
I am not at the point where I'm like managing teams of agents, although I've been learning about that. I haven't done it myself. I think because I don't necessarily have the right subscriptions to the tools that
Sure.
support it, is part of it. So like I'm on the fence right now of just deciding to go and get a Claude Code subscription because that seems to be the one that has the most features there. Mostly, I've been using ChatGPT for a long time, and then Copilot, GitHub Copilot, and the various models it exposes for probably the last year ish or so. And then like the ways that I'm using it, I've used basically, I think, pretty much all the ways that it supports. So, it's kind of cool that you can have your GitHub repo and you can create an issue and hopefully make it detailed enough that something can do the right thing. And you can just assign it to Copilot
Yeah.
in the UI and do that on your phone while you're, waiting in line at the bus stop or the airport. And then it'll go off and try and do the thing and then come back and say, here you go, here's a pull request. So, like that's kind of cool. And that was interesting. Like last fall when I was traveling in Europe, I was able to like be getting stuff done while I'm traveling and doing other things, which was kind of neat. It's not always the best, and I'm sure
Yeah.
part of that is how well I give it the context, but it was something, and it's gotten better. So then locally, I've spent a lot more time on planning, working with the LLM to create a plan before having it implement and then like reviewing the plan and making sure, yes, this is what I want, making sure the plan has different phases so it can do small bites, and not trying to one shot things because that's where it tends to go off the rails in my experience. So, keeping the context window small and reasonable and then restarting it frequently, kind of like the Ralph Wiggum loops that were very popular and I guess already out of vogue,
Sure,
uh,
yeah.
recently. But that kind of thing I've definitely played with.
Yeah, I think I definitely love the idea of, you know, somebody needs to look at this. I've not subscribed fully to the the team, and then I just I as the team lead, I just reviewed the end output, which is like the app doing its thing.
Yeah.
I feel super uncomfortable about that. But who knows? Like in 6 months, I don't write code at all anymore. I still, even if I have like a pretty long prompt, I'm trying to add some feature. Like I'll go and I'll look at the code. I'm like, I don't like the way they're doing this particular thing, and at the end of the day, like I'm probably gonna have to maintain this. Like I'm still thinking as
Right.
like a developer who has seen external code and have to like maintain it. So, and I was having a conversation with somebody. It's like, why would you maintain code anymore? Like somebody mentioned, and I'm just, in my brain, like I couldn't, my brain couldn't comprehend that question, right? Like, have you
Right.
started to kind of think about this, where it's like, as we go through the ideations of this or the permutations of this, like the amount of code that we're gonna write is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and then eventually might be none or very, 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 very small.
I don't know that we're gonna get there.
Yeah,
Uh, we'll see. I'll be surprised, right? And I've been surprised already in the last year how much things have gotten better. But um, like if you are just vibe coding an app and telling it to build this feature and it does, and maybe you give it like some Figma designs or some screenshots or whatever, uh, and you play with it and interact with it and look, it's doing the thing I told it to do. That is great, but there are a whole lot of non-functional requirements, if you will, that aren't always exposed like that. Like, is it secure? Right? Can you tell if you don't have any understanding of how it was coded? How are you going to know if it's secure?
yeah,
And is bot going to be able to tell you that it's secure, or is it just going to tell you, yeah, yeah, it's secure, right? Like, because it wants to please you. So like those types of things, I think for like real software and for like enterprise software, will continue to be areas in which you're going to need some expertise that humans can at least review, and it's not to say you can't have AI agents doing security audits and doing performance tuning and doing other things. Like they can try stuff and be very helpful in many of those roles. But you don't necessarily know what their blind spots are, and you can't always trust what they tell you because they're just probabilistic. So they just make stuff up sometimes, as people keep finding out to their detriment. Like every couple of days, there's another headline about, hey, these lawyers didn't realize that this thing was just making stuff up as they went, and it's every industry is being impacted by people trusting the output from AI agents. Like they are just autocomplete on steroids. Like they're
yeah,
really good steroids, but they're just making shit up. So it's yes, they're right 95% of the time, and sometimes they're not. And once they go off the rails, right, then autocomplete keeps autocompleting for the off the
yeah,
rails thing, and that's how you get really weird stuff out of the end. So I just don't know. And the last thing I would say that I'm experiencing right now is the AI code gen tends to be really myopic. It's like,
yeah,
I need to go find some context from these files. Okay, I understand. I'm going to go build this feature, and it builds it all in one place. I have yet to see an AI agent that says, I'm going to architect this, and I'm going to need to have an architecture that involves several projects with files in these all these different places and set this up. Like they almost always, for a particular feature, try to build it in one file. And whether that's HTML or C sharp or whatever the language might be, like they don't ideally jump around to too many files unless they already exist, right? If it's already in your project and it's like, oh, I need to put this here and put that there, that's fine. It'll do that. But by and large, it tends to make files longer. Even if you put in instructions and say, hey, I don't want files to be super long. I want to follow, single responsibility principle
sure,
or whatever you want to tell it. Like by default, it does not follow good architectural principles. And I'm sure that will get better. And I'm
yeah,
sure that we can prompt it to be better. But today, that's a problem. And the biggest reason it's a problem is because the context windows we have to work with are not that big. And so as these files get bigger, it has to either read the whole thing or which is bad because it fills up its context window, or it doesn't, which is bad because then it doesn't know that the function it's currently writing that it needed is actually down there on line 700. It already made it, but it didn't make it, in the window that it remembers, so it's doing it again. And it won't realize that problem until it compiles and sees there's a duplicate name, if it happened to guess the same name. Like those types of things I'm running into all the time. So I'm constantly having to help the agent refactor things to be smaller and better factored and better architected. And that's that and things like security are the two things that I think are going to be the biggest obstacles to these tools, just like going and doing things mostly on their own for enterprise software or mission critical software.
Yeah, I mean, and I was thinking about this before we got started, like, because if folks don't know, like, Steve talks a lot about, architecture and domain-driven design and all these sort of things, right? And you speak around the world talking about this to folks, and
Mhm.
I'm genuinely curious. It's like those sort of skills are never going to go away, right? Because I don't think you can even point, you know, ChatGPT or Copilot to like the spec or like the manifesto for domain driven designs and build an app that looks exactly like this. It probably won't be successful, right? Exactly to what you would expect. So my question for you is like, when you talk to people like around architecture, like, do you think about, okay, well, most of these people are probably using Copilot and they're going to need to like think about how they have to modify the code that gets generated to kind of fit the things that you're teaching them in these, workshops or sessions or whatever.
I haven't specifically thought about the fact that folks listening are using AI agents or Copilot or what have you. I do talk about the fact that you're going to have to deal with legacy code or brownfield development versus greenfield, and obviously like every architecture decision is much easier to do when you're starting than after you've put 5 years and lots and lots of person hours into building the thing, right? Um, so that's definitely a concern. And the folks that are like, why do we have to worry about maintaining software? We have LLMs now that can do that. Like they're not very good at dealing with large amounts of code.
Yeah.
Uh, again, the context window becomes the limiting factor for the most part, and they're really good at spitting out large amounts of code. So if you use them to build your code, like you're basically just producing technical debt
Yeah.
at a speed that humans can't rival, and then you're hoping that those same agents are going to be able to like deal with that huge amount of technical debt that they just created. I've compared it to the outsourcing craze that most of U.S. tech companies or IT departments and companies went through in like the early 2000s, like 2002 to 2012 or something. Like everybody wanted to like outsource their stuff to India or other locations where developers were 20 bucks an hour instead of 200 bucks an hour, 100 bucks an hour, whatever, way cheaper, right? And so many of them ended up inshoring or near shore, whatever, bringing it back in house because it was not great, right? They got a lot of productivity, they got a lot of stuff built, but in many cases it was not the quality that they were hoping for, and it was a lot of code. It was a lot of copy paste code because that's how you go fast until it doesn't. Like
Yeah.
you can copy paste your way to a lot of features on a line of business app for about a year to 2 years. And then, suddenly people start wondering, like, well, why is this change that you could have done in a week at the start of this project now takes 6 weeks? And things just start grinding to a halt. It's like because there's so much technical debt, and the LLMs are going to run into that too. The other thing that I don't think a lot of people have necessarily thought about is this is at this moment the cheapest that any of this stuff is going to be.
Yes.
And like all these prices for all this AI stuff, it's all being basically funded by venture capital in order to try and gain market share. And these companies are just losing billions of dollars every month. At some point, they're going to run out of venture money, and they're going to need to make a profit.
Yeah.
And those prices are going to go up by at least one and maybe two orders of magnitude. And so then the question becomes like, is it worth it to let the AI do everything about the software development process, or is it actually cheaper to have a bag of meat do some of that work?
Yeah, I was thinking about this morning because I've been playing around with like OpenClaw. And for folks that don't know about OpenClaw, it's like that AI personal assistant thing that everybody's been talking about. And I saw some video of some guy talking about how he's streamlining his business with all these things, and he has all these agents that are running. And like I was looking at what he was doing. It's like, oh, you're having like the agents like make API calls as a part of this process. And like, aren't you just wasting tokens? Like, couldn't you just write some code that like makes those API calls and then
Right.
use your agent to do whatever with that data? Like, it doesn't make sense if you have programming concepts. Having like a huge like it's the equivalent of like I'm gonna pay some person to go and read the newspaper for me and then tell me like what is in the newspaper. Like, wouldn't I just like read the newspaper myself or whatever? Like, that's a bad analogy, but like
Sure. Sure.
my point being is like I think that there's a lot of, oh, I just tell it to do something and it goes and does it, instead of thinking it's like, okay, how can I solve this problem with technology and then have something acting on my behalf with that data, that technology that I built. Shoot, you can have an LM or whatever build you some app that queries
Hmm.
API data, stores it in a local store database of some sort, and then you can just go from there. So like everything's automated still, but instead of burning
Right.
tokens like with your thing, like spinning up a code like in memory, like creating a Python app in memory, running it one time, making his thing, doing his thing, and then throwing that code away and then doing it again the next day doesn't make sense at all to me, right?
Right.
But this is
Yep.
what people are doing with it. And to your point, eventually things are going to get more expensive or the token limits are going to go down. It's like now it's like, okay, after you hit some token threshold, you start paying more. Well, at some point that's going to lower and lower and lower to your point. Like costs are going to go up somehow.
Right. And I think we will see a rise of local models, and a lot of things that you'll be able to do on your own graphics cards and whatever
Yeah.
in house. And larger companies will have, for a variety of reasons, they'll have their own locally hosted models that they'll hit instead of going out to the public ones, and that'll change the economics of it, I'm sure. But at the moment where the only things that are really useful for development are the models that are coming from the big AI companies, those are going to get expensive as soon as that money runs out and they need to start making a profit. And that's not that far out, right? Like
Yeah.
that's going to happen in the next 24 months, I think.
Well, they're already talking about putting ads in a lot of them, right? Like OpenAI
Yeah,
is
they're
talking
they're
about
trying to
putting
find
ads in
some
there.
way to stop the bleeding on the
Yeah.
revenue losses. Yeah,
Yeah,
they need to find some revenue.
I think the idea of local models is super interesting. Like to your point, like GPUs are, that's kind of like the bottleneck for local models. Like I run some local models, but I have a machine that not everybody in the world can afford, right?
Right?
Um,
Especially today
yeah, and
with
this
GPU prices
yeah,
and memory prices.
and I think a lot of this stuff, like it needs to be able to run on a phone. Like I was thinking about this the other day. It's like this stuff isn't really going to be worldly acceptable until it all runs on a phone. And, as we know, like even Google with their like top of the line phones, like I was reading an article when this phone came out. It's like it makes API calls or like external API calls to like do like video or like audio or no, photo processing. So like
Mhm.
you take a zoomed in photo and then it basically sends that photo to some API to like enhance it and then sends it back to you. So like you
Right?
can't even like do like photo restoring like without being with like being in airplane mode, which I thought was super
Yeah.
interesting. So like at some point, like we're gonna need phones that can do more, but that's not gonna happen like with the price of like hardware being what it is.
Yeah, and some of that's a design and or business choice also. Like, perhaps that's a thing where they are now locking you into a software as a service subscription to use that photo enhancing technology.
Yeah.
Or maybe they made a decision that like, yeah, we could do this on the phone, but the battery life would drop.
Yes.
Every time you did this with a picture, it would use 1% of your battery. So, even though we have to send some bits over the wire, it's still better for the battery if we let our, data center do that instead of the phone do it. Like, I know there's trade-offs for all this stuff, and it could well be that that's the main thing. It's like it's not that the phone can't do it today, but someone made a decision that it was more efficient or more profitable, or both, to not do it on the phone, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, it just reminds me a lot of, we talk a lot about like vendor lock-in with with like hyperscalers where it's like, "Oh, I'm using this particular SaaS service and I can't get out of it because my entire business is like built off of the proprietary like data formats, right?
Mhm.
Or whatever." Like I wonder if we're going to get to a point where all these cloud provide or these AI providers they start to have like very specific ways to do prompting like, like, oh, you can't just use the same prompt for ChatGPT versus Anthropic's models versus they just won't work. They'll give you results that just don't align at all. I wonder if
Mm,
that's the way that these companies are going to start to kind of create some sort of box around like being able to think, because you can very much like look, GitHub Copilot as an example. It's like, okay, like based on this prompt, like figure out what model is best and then like
right.
compare it to some other models as well, which is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, and there's nothing, if you have the budget, preventing you from potentially sending it out to several models.
Yeah.
Like you could have the same prompt and say, "Hey, I need to do this," and go use the 5 models you think are best, and then bring back the all the results, and I'll evaluate them. Or you have some other model that like evaluates all of them, and decides which one we think is the best one, or whatever, right? Kind of like in space, you have computer systems that might fail for various reasons we don't typically see on Earth. So they'll, in the early space program, they'll send up 3 computers, and if, 2 of them say that the result is this and one disagrees, the majority wins. You can almost see that happening with these models, and because of the fact that you guess the same model twice, you might get a different answer because they're statistical.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is it's fascinating because we're like right in the middle of it. And, somebody watching this or listening to this right now versus somebody watching or listening to this in like 2 weeks, like everything we've been talking about could be completely useless, right? So
Yeah.
it's so for this, like, how much are you actually like? I know you talked a little bit about like Ralph Wiggum loops and all sorts of other things that are somewhat recent, right? Um, like, how are you trying to keep up to speed with this stuff? It's like once it hits critical mass and like you're starting to see it like everywhere, like, do you start to take a look at it, or are you for the most part trying to ignore a lot of it until something kind of settles?
I'm trying to use it myself as much as I can. I'm not trying to evaluate every brand new model because I think the differences there are often marginal, and if one is more than marginally better, I'm going to hear about it.
Yeah,
But I am trying to like see where it fits. It's like when you learn a new skill, one of the ways that humans figure out like how to use a new skill is they overuse it. They try it in all these different places until they realize like this isn't this isn't a good fit here. It works here. And I'm in that phase right now of this overeager, overzealous use of the LLM for proof of concept projects and little play things that I'm doing. Like to be clear, I'm not like just YOLOing it and vibe coding things and giving it to paying clients for them to run in production. But I am trying as much as I can in my free time to evaluate what works and what doesn't work with these tools. And I have been fortunate to go to a bunch of conferences lately that I was presenting at. And at these conferences, there's a bunch of other really smart people that have also been doing the same type of thing. And so I'm talking to the other speakers. I'm watching some of the keynotes and presentations, and then following up and seeing things on YouTube, like Indie London, all their stuff. That was a couple weeks ago. All their stuff's on YouTube now, so I was just watching some of that in the past few days. Those are ways that I'm keeping up on things. I'm writing my own tooling that's like you know helping me do the plan mode of how I've found works well for building out features, and doing iterate with GitHub Copilot, because the Ralph Wiggum stuff was all for a different stack, right? And so I'm mostly using Copilot. So I was like, well, I can just use the Copilot SDK and do
yeah.
this myself. So I have my own tooling that's doing that, that I'm playing with, and it's not available anywhere, but it's I'm seeing how that works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for anybody who's learning any sort of new technology to actually find a use case for it, right? Like, I think that figuring out, like, okay, how can I use this to actually solve a problem versus let me just follow some steps online, like we were talking about a bit earlier, like that works. But I think that you're never really going to know how successful something is until you actually try to use it and then you figure out whether you love it or hate it. Um, and that, so you were talking a little bit about like going to conferences and that sort of thing, to learn. One of the things that, as we start to wrap up, like the things that I'd like to hear from you is like, we talk a lot about going to tech conferences and learning. But like when you go and talk to people that are at these things, like whether they're attendees or other speakers, like what is the general consensus of technology right now? Is it like everybody's just like, how do I use AI in my app? Like, or it's like, I'm not really 100% into this AI thing, but I know everybody's talking about it, so I'm gonna learn a little bit. Like, what is the general sentiment that you get when you go and speak at events?
It varies widely. I like the quote from William Gibson, that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of folks that are using AI and are uh, yeah, look, even if you evaluated the state of AI agents and things for, let's say, software development assistants 6 months ago versus today, like it is a whole different world. And
Yeah.
so, there were cheerleaders 6 months ago that were saying how great it was, but if you actually tried it 6 months ago, it wasn't really that great. And a lot of that has really changed even in just the last couple of months, I think, with some of the newer models and some of the newer techniques. And so, like a lot of folks that were cynical or naysayers, I think uh, should reevaluate that position. And I think you're seeing that in the community right now. I think that's like the thing that's happening is there's folks that are impressed with what they're seeing. There's folks that tried it and it didn't work and they aren't impressed. And there's a growing number of people that tried it and it didn't work. And then they tried it again later and oh my God, now it's pretty good actually.
Sure.
And there's still a lot of pitfalls and a lot of problems. And figuring out the right way to make it work well is the thing we're all trying to figure out right now.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we want consistent results from a stochastic parrot, from a probabilistic engine that just spits out something that it thinks is the most likely token to come out after the previous 10,000 that it has. And that's really hard. And there's some problems it's really well suited for. Uh, but trying to have it do deterministic things like you were just saying, like that's generally a waste of tokens. If you have a repeatable thing you want it to do deterministically, uh, instead of having it do it, have it write you a program to do it,
Yeah.
and then call that program. Like that's the right way to do this, rather than trying to have an agent that performs in a deterministic manner.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the idea that it's like treat these things like humans is really kind of defeating the purpose, right? Like, I think that there's not a direct correlation between what an agent does and what a person can do. I think that there's automation there, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it's like, okay, can this thing accomplish this task? Yes or no? Right? And if the answer is
Right?
yes, okay, well, what is it doing as it processes this task that would be different than what if a person was to do it? Because the whole point is to like augment the output or the efficiency of something, not just replicate it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and ideally you want to get a better output uh, with less effort,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of organizations are okay with a crappy output for much less cost, right?
Sure.
And so we're seeing a
Sure.
lot of AI slop, where companies are okay with that, uh, and even individual consumers maybe are okay with that, to the detriment of folks that are really good at doing those tasks, especially a lot of creative tasks, right? Like images and photos and drawings and graphics, and even songs and movies and things like a whole lot of tools are making a bunch of AI slop for that stuff, and a whole lot of people that were really good at that are maybe hurting for as much business as they had 10 years ago,
Yeah.
which is unfortunate. And there's a lot of examples of where you can see obvious AI just really bad stuff showing up in places where the company really could have afforded to do the right thing here, and not just have some AI do it and then not even review the results.
Yeah, well, I think that's where we're kinda going. I think that, you know, I think we're gonna eventually there's gonna be tastes that are built into this. Like, you're gonna see something and be like, "I don't like the way that tastes. I don't like the way that looks. I don't like the" like, I think we're gonna start to be a bit more, critical of the things that we're seeing. Like, you're already starting to see it, like, you see a video and immediately people are like, "That's AI." Or they'll
Mm,
say, like, or they'll question, "Is that AI?" And I think that
right,
as we get better at detecting these sort of things, like, things are gonna get, like, more challenging to detect, but I think we still need to
right.
consistently push back and say, "This is real, this is not real, this is made by a human, this is not made by a human." Because I think there is a level of human experience that's built into these things, but not all of it, right? Like, because 'cause they're not thinking, really. Like you said, they're just, "What's next? What's next in the string or what's next in the
Right.
byte that I need to generate?"
Yeah.
Um,
The other thing that society and businesses are having to figure out and contend with is there's no accountability.
Sure.
right? Like when these things screw up, when they make mistakes, if they lose if they decide to drop the corporate database, or they decide to diagnose somebody as being fine when they really had cancer that would have been easily treated, but now the person's going to die, like the AI can't be held accountable. You could point it out to it, and it'll say, "Oh yes, you're right. I can see. I blah blah blah." Right? What does that accomplish? Right? Like there's no accountability, and so the only thing that can be accountable is a person. And so
Yeah.
a lot of these things are going to have people in the process. And the part that sucks is that for many of these processes, the person is going to be there for the sole purpose of being held accountable. They're like, hey, we're going to have the AI do everything. You just need to review the result and make
Yeah.
sure that it's not going to kill anyone. Like, so now instead of you getting to do the part that you're trained to do of actually building the building or diagnosing the patient or writing the software, like your job is to try to look at the output from an AI and decide whether or not it's right, without even all the input and context that it had in many cases. And then you get to be the person that takes the fall if it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what a world to live in, right? Where it's like your job is to just be the fall person for for
Right.
AI not doing what you want. Um, yeah. Anyway, that's an interesting thing to think about. And I think one of the things that I really appreciate in this conversation is like, level-headedness. Because I think that a lot of people, like you're talking about, like everybody's talking about right now, everybody's very, very excited at the opportunities, but people aren't thinking about the level head. At least some people aren't. And I really appreciate you kind of coming in and say, like, look, this works in some cases. I'm somewhat curious about them, but at the same time, I really know how I I understand what the eventuality of the outcome is. And I think it's really, really important to continue saying that. Um, so for folks that might not be following Steve today, I highly recommend you doing so because there's always great talk about architecture and building programs and things really about how we can make technology a bit more accessible. Best way is there's do you have the same you have Ardalis everywhere, right?
I try to, yes.
Yeah. So
YouTube, GitHub, Blue
yeah.
Sky,
So you can
Ardalis.com.
yeah, you can find him at Ardalis, Ardalis. If you probably search that in any platform, you're gonna find him. Um, so I highly recommend you doing so. There'll also be some links to some other things that Steve's got going on as well in the show notes. Before we sign off, my friend, do you have any parting words?
Keep improving, and it's definitely a fun time to be in software.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I think I've been able to build things that I typically would never build because I'm like, I don't want to start this because it's going to take a couple weeks of my time. And 20 minutes later, I have something that works, and I'm like, oh, okay, well
Yeah,
that's cool.
I've done
For
some of that as well. It's been
that
really fun.
like for little side projects, I think this stuff is really really awesome. Building enterprise software, that's a different conversation for a different day. Um,
Yeah,
and I want to thank you so much for your time, Steve. I really appreciate it. I want to thank the folks that are tuning into this live and the folks that are listening in the future. This has been Coffee and Open Source. My name is Isaac Levin. You can find me online, Isaac R. Levin, basically everywhere. So share with your friends and let me know if you want to chat. So for my friend Steve, I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day. Take care.
thanks.